Hey, everybody, and welcome now to the next lesson as we continue our journey through the biblical narrative. This week, we are going to be looking at the story of Joseph. This covers the tail end of the portion of the book of Genesis. We're actually going to cover portions of chapters 37 through 50, which I know sounds like a lot. We will cover a lot of ground, but of course, we will not read everything. As we are starting off today, I'm going to have you in just a second here put me on pause as we usually do and share together in your highs and lows what has been going good this week, what has not been going so great, and also share in a time of prayer. Now, usually I actually show you what the prayer is. Today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. So I'm going to have you look in your Bibles for Psalm 23, and Psalm 23 will be the prayer that you share together. Now, if you're looking for Psalms is almost smack dab in the middle. If you look, I'm on Psalm 23 right here in my Bible, which you can't really see because of the glare, but right there in the middle. So look in the middle, you'll find Psalms, find Psalm 23, pray that together. So do all of those and then come on back and resume. Okay, so today we are continuing to look at the stories of the patriarchs that began with Abraham, and that's what we really looked at last week. That's where we left off. We left off with Abraham and Sarah finally having had the child of God's promise in their son, Isaac. Now, if you recall, Isaac, while being their first son, is not Abraham's first son. He had his son Ishmael with Hagar. And at that time, the oldest son was considered to be the heir and was the favored one. Now, in that time, not only did the heir pretty much inherit everything, a younger son might get a small inheritance, but not really a whole lot. But also, the oldest son would receive the blessing of the father. And this was a really, really, really big deal. Like you wanted the blessing. That was something that you wanted. But what we're going to see is as this promise of God, the covenant of God, which goes through Isaac, we're going to continue to see this same idea of God using or favoring the unexpected one. If you think about it, we saw this all the way back in chapter 3 with Cain and Abel. Remember, Cain was the older of the two brothers, but God favored the offering of Abel, and that was kind of the start of this oddball theme that we continue to see over and over and over again of God favoring the unexpected, and that's going to continue. Now today, we're fast forwarding from Genesis chapter 21 to 37, as I mentioned at the beginning. Now in this gap, what happens? Isaac grows up. He gets a wife in his wife, Rachel. We actually see a little bit of a low-key repeat in terms of this early story of Isaac and Rachel, as we saw with Abraham and Sarah. Rachel is also barren, just like Sarah had been. But after a while, God repeats the promise to Isaac, and eventually Rachel has twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Now, Esau is the older by about a minute-ish. Jacob is the younger one, but he is a schemer. And Jacob manages to receive God's favor, not because he's a schemer, but that they just happen hand in hand. He tricks his older brother out of the inheritance. He also manages to trick dad, who is Isaac, into giving him the blessing. So Jacob really kind of fares pretty well. But Esau is pretty mad about this. Esau actually wants to kill him. We're kind of seeing a repeat there as well. Jacob runs off to his mother's home and meets her brother Laban. Gradually, he works for Laban for a long time. He's gone for a really long time. And he schemes his way into vast riches, which basically means he's got a whole lot of flocks and livestock, and a humongous family. He has 2 wives, he has 2 concubines, 12 sons, and many daughters. So he's grown rich. He's got a great big huge family. God has continued to bless him throughout the course of this long, long, long time. Now, of his 12 sons, Joseph, who we're basically going to focus in on today, Joseph is son number 11. So about as far away from being the heir as he can possibly be. And yet, Joseph is the one who God blesses. He's given the ability to have prophetic dreams when he is a child. He's the favored son of Jacob, and he's the favored son because Joseph is actually the first son of Jacob's preferred wife, Rachel. And, I think I may have had some of those names wrong. I called wives the wrong things at different times. But regardless, Rachel is Jacob's favored wife. And Joseph is her first son, so that is why he is the favored son over the other 11, even though most of them are older than he is. Now, this gap, chapter 21 through 37, basically covers all of these stories, and it's vast. It covers these three generations who are known as the patriarchs. Now, question for you, and I want you to record this. Patriarch means fathers or ancestors. So if we're calling these three guys, first Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob, if we're calling them the patriarchs of who? I want you to answer that. Okay, and come on back. We're going to pick up with our reading now at chapter 37, verses 1 through 4. So I want you to read that. Okay, we see that Joseph is favored. And that this favor is shown as dad gives him this long robe, this long flowing robe with flowing sleeves. Now, this would have been a symbol of status. In that time, everybody worked hard. But the harder you had to work and the more grunt work, if we want to call it that, you did, usually the shorter your robe would be, as well as your sleeves, because you didn't want them hanging and stuff. So for Joseph to get this long flowing robe, that's a symbol of status. Like he's important in the household. He's too important to do manual labor. That's basically what this is saying. This doesn't sit real well with his brothers, as you can probably imagine. That being said, now take a look at verses 5 through 8. Go ahead and read those. Okay, so Joseph has this really weird dream. He babbles about it to his brothers, and he's like, oh, what do you guys think this means? And they don't really like it. It makes him hate them all the more. But he's the typical annoying younger sibling. I'm sure none of you can imagine what that's like. And so he goes on. Now go ahead and read 9 through 11. He has a second dream. And this time, even his dad gets a little testy with him because he is lording his featured status over everybody. Okay, now, verses 12 through 24. Go ahead and read those. All right. So now the brothers see an opportunity to teach him a lesson. They're all like, hey, let's kill him. Then we don't have to worry about him anymore, except for Reuben. Now, here's what you need to know about brother Reuben. Reuben is the oldest. He is Jacob's first son, so therefore he's got the most responsibility. So if something happens to Joseph, Reuben's going to get blamed. So no wonder he's like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't kill him. Let's not do that. Okay, now go ahead and read verses 25 through 36. The brothers decide, instead of killing him, let's make a buck. And they sell him off to some traders, some Ishmaelite traders. Hey, Ishmaelites, I wonder who their descendants are. They tell dad, they go off and tell dad that Joseph's been killed by an animal, and they bring his robe and they show him it's all covered in blood. And they're like, oh, look. And dad goes into mourning. And in this time, Joseph ends up getting carted off to Egypt as a slave. That is kind of where that picks up. Now, little gap here, we got chapter 38, which continues to focus on the family and some really weird, really inappropriate, really not okay family dynamics. You can look at it if you want to, but you can also skip over that. We're going to pick up now at chapter 39, read verses 1 through 6. Now, here's a question for you. Joseph is now in Potiphar's house. How does it initially go for Joseph in Potiphar's house? I want you to talk about that and write that down. Okay, so as time goes by, we see that Potiphar's wife actually takes a liking to Joseph. She tries repeatedly to seduce him, but he keeps saying, no, I can't do this. No, 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 no. Now, at one point, she grabs him by the robe, and he basically slips his robe off and runs away, actually naked, which is strange, but he did. And this makes her so angry since he left his robe behind. She accuses him of having raped her. This does not go well for Joseph, as you can imagine. It's a complete reversal of power. Now, normally in this time, women didn't have a lot of power, but in this situation, she is the wife of the master of the house. And so even though Joseph had gained a whole lot of favor, she's the wife. And he's a slave. He is still a slave. So we see this reversal of power, how she really takes hold of the power and abuses it and uses her position to get him in trouble. Now I want you to go ahead and read verses 19 through 23. Go ahead and do that. Okay. Now we see that Potiphar has Joseph thrown in prison. Now, here's the next question, and I want you to write this one down as well. What happens to him in prison? And has this sort of thing happened to him before? Go ahead and record that. All right. So Joseph's now in prison for a while. In chapter 40, this idea of dreams starts to pop up again, not so much for him now, as opposed to now he can interpret dreams. And some of the people who are in prison with him have dreams. Two of these people are actually very high, important people in Pharaoh's household, in Pharaoh's court, one of which is the cupbearer, which is essentially the person who holds his wine. Important, right? He shares his dreams with Joseph. Joseph tells him, "You will be restored. You'll come out of prison. You'll go back to serve Pharaoh once again. And when you do, don't forget about it." It happens, and he forgets about him for about 2 years. 2 more years go by, and now in chapter 41, Pharaoh starts having some weird dreams. No one can tell him what's up with it. Not his mystics, not the magicians. No one. They're like, "Dude, we have no idea what this means." But now the cupbearer remembers 2 years ago, "Oh yeah, when I was in prison, there was this cool guy named Joseph and he could interpret dreams. Maybe you should talk to him." So Joseph gets brought out of prison. He interprets Pharaoh's dreams, which are actually warnings that they were going to have 7 years of plenty, followed up by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph warns him about that. In addition, Joseph also has a plan. With that, now I want you to read chapter 41, verses 33 through 36. Go ahead and read that. Okay, so Pharaoh hears the plan. Pharaoh really likes it. Now read 37 through 41. Okay, question, write this down, record it. Now, given this whole deal, what happens to Joseph? And has this happened before? Okay, go ahead and write that down. Once again, we see that Joseph is being placed in charge of things. It's happened 3 times since he came into Egypt. Now, he was 17 at the beginning of this whole deal. Now he's 30. In 13 years, he has gone from being a slave to basically the head of Potiphar's household. And then he went from being a prisoner to the head of the prison. And then finally, he ends up second in command of all Egypt. Not too bad for 13 years. Not too bad. Remember that whole thing that we saw earlier? God was with him and blessed all that he did. Seems kind of fitting because in everything he does, it always seems to go well for him. Even when he finds himself in a lousy situation, it seems to emerge that things are going well. All right, 7 more years go by. This is the 7 years of plenty. Joseph accomplishes the plan that he had laid out. Egypt becomes the stronghold with all kinds of resources when the famine strikes. Now, the famine is very widespread. People all over are affected by it. And they're coming from everywhere around the known world to try and buy food from Egypt. This was the whole plan that Joseph had laid out for him. This includes Jacob, dad, sending the 10 older brothers to buy food. Now, when this happens, it's been at least 20 years since they have seen them. They don't recognize Joseph, but by golly, Joseph recognizes them. Now, in chapter 42 through 44, he kind of messes with them a little bit. Maybe this is a little bit of like, "Hey, you guys sold me off into slavery. I'm gonna get a little tiny bit of a revenge on you." And he really sort of messes around with them. He sends them back and forth to go from Egypt back to Canaan. That's what they called Israel at that time. He gets them to bring Benjamin, who's the younger brother, to bring him there. Eventually, he throws them in prison, and leaves them there for a little bit, and then sends all but one of them back to Canaan again to get Jacob, dad, and bring him down. Now I want you to go ahead and read chapter 45, 4 through 12. So go ahead and read that part. Okay. Now we see that throughout all of this, Joseph has forgiven his brothers. Now I want you to, now we fast forward again, a lot of fast forwarding here. Chapters 46 through 49, we hear about Jacob's relocation to Egypt, bringing his whole household. The family is treated well by Pharaoh because of Joseph, because of all that Joseph has done. Eventually, Jacob dies. And at this point now, the brothers are scared. They're like, "Well, he was nice to us when dad was still around. Now dad's dead. Is he gonna take revenge now?" So now I want you to read chapter 50, verses 15 through 21, and we see the response. Okay, so this marks the end of Genesis. Finally, now we have gotten to the end of Genesis. Following the end of Genesis, we have a 400-year gap between Genesis and Exodus. During this time, the family multiplies. It was a good-sized family to start with, and they multiply, reaching like 2 million people, 2 million Israelites. Side note, Israel is the name of Jacob, another name of Jacob. God renamed Jacob Israel. There's that whole renaming thing like we talked about last week. During this 400 years, as the people are expanding, the favor that Egypt initially showed to the Israelites begins to wane. And they're like, there could be issues here. Maybe we should make them slaves and keep them so downtrodden that they won't realize that they outnumber us. So the Israelites become slaves to the Egyptians. That's where Exodus is going to pick up. That's where we're going to pick up in our next lesson, which will be in 2 weeks. Remember, I mentioned this before, Thanksgiving week, we're off there. There will not be a new lesson there. So we'll pick up with that in a couple of weeks. Now, here at the end, let's see, I need to say a little bit more. So a lot of scholars think that Exodus is actually the first book that was written, or was where the story really started. But the book of Genesis is intended to show the Israelite people, or the Jewish people, where their culture originated and how they got to Egypt. So this story, the story of Joseph, really highlights this idea that sometimes bad things can happen, but God can make good stuff come out of it. So here's a question for you. This is a discussion thing that I want you to talk about and record. Do you think that's true? Do you think that when bad stuff happens, God can bring good stuff out of it? And can you think of any examples that are like that? And then the final question, and maybe this was a tricky one, so just share what you think. No right answers, no wrong answers. Do you think that God makes bad stuff happen, or that God simply allows things to happen that are sometimes bad, knowing that good can come out? Beyond that, if you have any thoughts or questions or concerns, something that you're wondering about after this lesson, go ahead and record that and send that to me as well. Go ahead and get those sent in, and I will get a response back to you as we move forward. Thanks, everybody.